Good morning for some of the people that are looking at from other places in the world, or good evening. Thank you all for joining me today for the fifth of our Columbia CBIPS lecture series on the AEC experience relating to COVID-19. I'm Feniowski Peñamora, Director of the Columbia Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, and Public Space at Columbia's Full Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Science. As the events of the last week have demonstrated, we are living during a exceedingly challenging time, characterized by divides, distrust, and distances. However far apart we have been, however far apart we currently are, we need to come together, to be together, to act together for justice for the victims of murder, marginalization, and repression because of their skin color and those who seek justice through protests across our country. I hope that the events of these weeks bring better understanding of the injustices that exist and become a catalyst to bring about real change for all. Along with many of our colleagues in New York City and around the world, the faculty and staff of the Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, and Public Space, we would like to add our voice for those denouncing the systemic and institutionalized racism. We stand with our Black architects, Black engineers, Black contractors, Black suppliers, and Black communities. We all need to build a better future for our city and for our world, a world characterized by respect, opportunity, and collaboration. These lectures bring together to address the impact, response, recovery, and preparedness of the AEC industry to the coronavirus pandemic. In so doing, they must concurrently speak to the major social and environmental issues of the day, including endemic racism and the challenges of climate change. If you build something, who is it for? If you design something, who gets to build it? Acknowledging such questions and expectations of change, our lecture program will continue every Tuesday at noon into September with 19 talks from leaders in both the public and private sectors focused on the AEC experience relating to COVID-19, with different speakers who will also focus on social, economic, and environmental justice in the new normal post-COVID-19 AEC world. Our first three speakers are all working in municipal governments in New York. Last week, four lectures brought in a distinguished leader in the private practice. And with the fifth talk today, we broaden the lens and reach out to colleagues working on sustainability and transportation infrastructure issues in Los Angeles. The sixth lecture will take the discussion to infrastructure in Paris and the reimagination of transportation and urbanism with its implication for economic justice. Subsequent talks will focus on work in London, Chicago, and Sao Paulo. Please check our website to see more information about our next speakers and my co-moderators. I also would like to thank the organizations with whom we are collaborating in presenting these lectures. They are the American Council of Engineering Companies, New York, thanks Jay Simpson, the American Institute of Architects, New York, chapter, thanks Benjamin Prosky, the American Society of Civil Engineers, thanks Tom Smith, who is here with us today and being one of my co-moderators. The Construction and Management Association of America, New York, New Jersey, thanks Vinny Folkowski. Engineering News Records, thanks Jan Turkman. And the National Academy of Construction, thanks Wayne Crew. And going forward with today's lecture, I'm pleased to announce that the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization has joined us as a collaborator. Thanks, Lance Brown. Today, I'm pleased that Tom Smith, III, has joined me by Zoom to be co-moderator and respondent. Tom serves as the AEC Executive Director, a dedicated member of the American Society of Civil Engineers for more than 25 years, and a civil engineer by training and education. Tom also has a law degree. Before joining AEC in 1997 as the Associate General Counsel, he practiced law with focus on land issues. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Our speaker today, the fifth in this series, is Dr. Cris Liban, LA Metro's Chief Sustainability Officer. Cris oversees LA Metro international recognized environmental sustainability and energy initiatives. At LA Metro, he's leading efforts to ensure that the $140 billion infrastructure program and the 28 transportation and transit projects that must be completed by the 2028 Olympics the region is hosting are climate adapted and resilient. Cris is a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers and is a member of the US EPA National Advisory Council for Environmental Policy and Technology. This past year, he has also been appointed to the Los Angeles County Beach Commission, which oversees all LA County beach activities, including environmental, transportation, and construction issues. In 2016, he received from Philippines President Rodrigo Duarte the Philippines' highest civilian award for Filipinos living overseas. He has a degree in geology, civil and environmental engineering, and environmental science and engineering. You can see his full bio online on the CBIPS website. The topic of his talk is how do we properly bounce back? Reflections on climate change impacts, infrastructure, and equity. I look forward to hearing about his take on the impact of COVID-19 on environmental and transportation infrastructure issues in Los Angeles. Thank you for being here, Cris, with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fenioski, for this opportunity to be with you and the rest of your audience here today. From Los Angeles, we salute all of the efforts that everybody is going through right now to make people aware of the injustices, not only here in Los Angeles, but across the planet. So what I wanted to do today is essentially look through how do we properly bounce back? We have been through a crisis in the last few months. And prior to that crisis, we've had a number of activities that we've been doing as an agency, as a country, as a planet. But where do we go? Where do we go from here? Before I do that, let me just share with you something that we're doing as an agency today. Today, June 9th, is Metro Employee Day of Remembrance. As I speak to you today, we're towards the end of the first 8.5 minutes of this remembrance, commemorating the death of George Floyd under police protection and allowing us to reflect on what this really means to us as an agency, to us as a community, and to us as a region and as a state. Just very briefly, for those who are not familiar with the LA County Metro, just wanted to provide you with some information on Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County is the largest US economy in the world. There's about 88, 89 cities here in the county. We're approximately 5,000 square miles, larger than the state of Rhode Island, with a population of over 10 million people. We're very diverse in this county. More than 40% are foreign-born, over 220 languages spoken. And in 2012, I think it's still relevant, Sacramento Bee had classified us as the 21st largest economy, 16th largest if 4 surrounding counties are included. LA County Metro, my agency, is a transportation agency, but we transcend that function. We actually provide services and we provide the goals and the work that we do here, work through the various segments of society. And because of that, we are a very functioning, we're a very nimble and we're functioning according to how we form as well as connect the different communities here in Los Angeles. I just want to double check if my slides are moving.
No, you have to, yeah, now it's moving. Okay.
I'm sorry. So a regional transit planner, funder, as well as a builder. We're also an operator here in LA County. As you can see here in this slide, we essentially are through a measure that was passed by our voters back in 2008. We have been working through expanding our system through Measure R and doubling that system for the past few years. In 2016, our voters have voted a $120 billion program called Measure M, wherein this program has no sunset. It provides funding not only for infrastructure, but also for operations and maintenance. And then we're getting ready for the 2028 Olympics and the 2026 World Cup here in Los Angeles. So you could see pre-lockdown, pre-pandemic, and pre all of these activities that we're seeing through today, we've been very busy here in Los Angeles, working through, as I speak to you today, through almost $20 billion worth of infrastructure projects. I wanted to show you here in terms of our existing and future transit and highway projects. This is our 40-year plan here in LA County. And once we're done with these projects, we're going to do it again in expanding transportation system here in the county. What we have also done in the last few years is looking at our critical and at-risk facilities. As you can see here in our map, we have looked at all of the existing stations as well as the facilities that we own all over LA County. And we mapped this according to the risk to the following: high heat days, precipitation, flooding, wind, and wildfire. And since we're here in California, we also looked at earthquakes as well as sea level rise. Those two, earthquakes and sea level rise, don't necessarily form a significant risk to our facilities in terms of what we are concerned with in the near term. Earthquake is unpredictable, as we know, and sea level rise, we don't necessarily have a significant number of facilities near the ocean. Although, as you could see, our transportation system actually is leading up to the cities adjacent to the ocean. We've also mapped in the last few years the transportation and overlaid the transportation system over areas where we have what we call vulnerable populations. As you can see here on the screen, the yellow areas are those areas where the poverty line is greater than 25% of the US normal. There are also areas in here in this map where we show in the blue where there are folks who are within our transportation service area who have no vehicles, and we overlaid those two factors in this particular map, and those are showing both in the green, both those who are above the 25% poverty line, as well as those who don't have any vehicles to move around the city. As you can see, we are a lifeline here in Los Angeles. As you can see, we provide and connect the connection throughout LA County. As you can see, we're the lifeblood of many of our population here in Los Angeles. So these are all the activities that we've been doing in the last few years, and specifically in the last few months leading up to the winter of this year. And then the pandemic hit. When the pandemic hit, as you can see in this chart, from before March of 2020, we actually have been moving almost, I should say, over 1 million people, pretty much on a daily basis across LA County. And when the pandemic hit, essentially that number of riders has gone significantly for both our bus and rail system. And in March, which is the latest information we have here in the agency, we have about approximately 400,000 riders, which is just about a third of the ridership that we have. I miss my bus. I ride the bus pretty much on a regular basis with connections to the train, and along with the folks who are going wherever we need to go, and especially those who are transit dependent. We miss them. And most of us are either at home or unemployed. As far as revenues are concerned, revenues have gone down. LA Metro source of revenues include sales tax, fare box recovery, those fares that we collect from buses and trains. We have a toll system here in Los Angeles County along the I-10 as well as the 110 freeways, as well as others. Here in my department, we also have what we call as carbon credits revenue. 60% of all our revenues come from sales tax. And as you could imagine, because of the pandemic, because of all of the economic inactivity that we have been seeing in the last few months, that revenue has gone down. Let me just give you an illustration of how much that revenue has gone down in the last reporting period that we had. So you could see, as we're tracking FY18, FY19, which are the lighter green shades, and then FY20, which is the dark green shade in this graph. Back in March, that sales tax revenue has gone down by up to 60%. And then we've been trying to struggle with the structural deficit in the last few weeks, talking about programs that we can actually fund, as well as continue programs that we think are continually essential, especially bus operations. But you could see in this particular graph on the bottom, the yellow graph essentially is our projected budget for this next fiscal year, FY21. And then we have our budget office has provided us with information on the range of potential revenues that we can expect in the next few months. So you could see there's a significant funding gap. But despite all of that, despite all of these issues that we're faced with in here, we essentially are very optimistic that things are going to become active again, at least here in LA County, but with a cautionary tale. And I read with you something that it's an op-ed from, and I present to you an op-ed from back in April 27 of this year, where Nick Goldberg had essentially mentioned here that apparently neither the soul-crushing traffic nor the cataclysmic threat of global climate change is enough to convince us to change our behavior. And he's talking about the pandemic. And he's talking about how we have gone from a vibrant community to where we are right now. But at the same time, in this particular op-ed, he also mentions that, you know, we have seen folks essentially stay at home, but have gone back out after the situation has changed. And he cited the 1984 Olympics, he cited the LA riots, he cited the Northridge earthquake. And after all of those significant issues, traffic has come back. So he cautions that, so make good use of the extra time in your day while you have it. It's not likely to last. So in that context, the rest of my presentation essentially is trying to figure out where we really should be falling in terms of our future activities as an agency. I'll be focusing on several things that I have been involved with as an agency, as a department within my organization. And we'll provide you with some information on what we have been doing and how we've been planning for the next few months as we expect people to come back, as we expect LA County to open up again. So just a little bit of context. On May 18th, as you can see here, this is a Google map from Steve Hyman, one of our communications department staff. As you can see here, LA County freeways showing green on Google Maps. Green means traffic is just flowing really well. But I would like to focus on this particular area. I was in that particular area where the dash circle is about a week or so ago. And actually what I've seen was this. And then 2 miles later, that. So it makes me think that we are in a situation where we have less congestion, we have high speeds, we can go wherever we need to go. People are starting to discover the value of telecommuting. And at the same time, we're seeing this kind of picture as we move forward to opening up our system. are opening up our economy, opening up our stores in our businesses. And it makes me think if indeed the new normal that we're seeing without congestion could last. And so in that context, we continue on with our activities and programs here in LA Metro. We just presented to our board our long-range transportation plan. But despite the COVID situation, despite the pandemic, despite the challenges that I've presented to you in the last few months, we are confident that by essentially moving forward with some of our vision for LA County, it will be able to be proactive in not only the transportation system here as we plan and build and operate that system, but at the very least be nimble and be able to put out there what our vision is and adjust accordingly. So in our next long-range transportation plan, we are essentially looking at better transit system. We're looking at less congestion, and I hope that the absence of congestion that we're seeing right now actually maintains itself over the next few more years. We're looking at complete streets that includes active transportation investments, strategies and actions, as well as performance measures to actually measure complete streets. We're looking at access to opportunities in the context of joint development projects, strategies and actions related to those. And we are also looking at and optimistic that despite the challenges in the sales tax revenues, despite the challenges in our fare box recovery, despite the challenges in our reduction in toll revenue, and we'll be able to recover along with our citizens here in LA County to fund this transportation revolution here in our region. So I wanted to focus on this particular slide on what this organization has done, not only here in LA County, but also for our region in terms of our environmental and sustainability accomplishments. I was anticipating 2020 as the decade of action in terms of climate change. And that's where we have been working on, and that's where we have been moving towards in the last few years. In fact, I'll mention a little bit later on some of the activities I've actually been doing with other organizations in terms of our preparation, not only as an agency, but our preparation for this decade of action that we're seeing right now. We had planned to essentially reach a 2030 goal of approximately 80% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions and be net zero GHG emissions by 2050. As you can see here in all of our investments and all of the activities that we're trying to do, we have presented to you here a business as usual scenario in terms of the orange bar chart on the right side of the graph. And then what we have been trying to address in the next few more years on accelerating some of these projects by dealing with the remaining emissions, the green bar charts on the right. And as you could sense there, business as usual without doing anything, we're actually going to be on the march towards a zero emissions future. But these investments that we're planning to do but that are now impacted by our structural deficit are designed and programmed to help us. And we need to rethink how those green investments are now going to proceed because of these challenges. We built into our system, we built into our process what we call as the Building Climate Resilience Initiative. What we have done here is we are in essence, as you could see, moving forward with information that we know now, with actions that we can do now. And as information actually becomes available for us in the future, we will try to make adjustments on those actions. And this is what we call as adaptive design or adaptive action, wherein when we presented our action plan to the board, to our board, last year in moving towards a zero emissions future, that what we said is that we're going to make these investments as we see fit, and we're going to make adjustments to these investments as the information becomes available or constraints allow us to either decelerate or accelerate these strategies. And guess what? We're in that right now. We're in that situation right now, and we're making adjustments to our strategies, but still try to achieve a 2030 zero emissions goal, sorry, 2050 zero emissions goal, and 80% emissions reduction by 2030. Related to this is a development of a more comprehensive sustainability master plan. This has been a year and a half in the making. We've had a lot of inputs from our strategic plan, the Vision 2028 strategic plan. We've also had a lot of inputs in terms of the long-range transportation plan, which I described earlier. We have an equity platform here in the organization, considering all of the opportunities, not only for our communities here, but also with the outlying communities of Los Angeles, as well as out-of-board actions, stakeholder inputs, plans, and policies. As you could also imagine, because of the situation that we're in right now, we're actually looking at adjusting the master plan as we conceived it and as we have developed it in the last year. And our goal here for this master plan, given the fiscal constraints that we have, is for our master plan to be self-funding. Just a very brief note on that one. In the last 3 years, this department, actually, our department, the Environmental and Sustainability Department, has generated a significant amount of revenues in terms of carbon credits here in Los Angeles and California. And what we have done is essentially used and recycled those funds for sustainable infrastructure. And we want to continue that effort as we move forward in the next few years. Those revenues are going to be impacted significantly, but it would still be a net revenue, at least in the very short term, to fund these initiatives that we have for the master plan. Just a brief note on other activities that influence the efforts that I have here on Los Angeles County Metro. Been privileged to be part of a climate safe commission that produced this report that I provide you here, which has the particular conclusions on the right side, as bullets on the right side. The climate safe infrastructure as a policy here in California, that there'd be permanent funding for science and infrastructure, as well as reinventing the process and training all phases of the process for infrastructure, developing standards and manuals of practices and changes in procurement, and then making a climate safe commission permanent. This is the first time in this climate safe commission, this is the first time that scientists and engineers were put together by an entity like the state of California for scientists to inform the design of infrastructure, the operations of infrastructure, as well as the building of infrastructure. And then for engineers and practitioners to actually collaborate with climate scientists to be proactive in those particular efforts of construction and design. This particular bill has been reauthorized, or is in the process of being reauthorized right now. It's supposed to sunset beginning July 31st of this year. But because of some efforts that had included the American Society of Civil Engineers here in California, as well as ASCE efforts nationally, this Assembly Bill, AB 2800, has been reauthorized to essentially continue on, and for whatever efforts the Climate Safe Commission needs to do, given resources available to it in the future, could continue on with the conversation. I've also been privileged to be part of what we call the California Green Bonds Committee. This is a committee that was formed by the state treasurer here in California. The significance of this in what I'm talking about here right now is essentially looking at alternative forms of funding and financing for different projects. The program that we have developed here in LA Metro, the Sustainability and Environmental Program we have developed here in LA Metro, it always looked at alternative forms of funding and financing. And one of the things that we have been very successful on is working with our treasurer, our LA Metro treasurer in the past year, in raising almost $1 billion for green infrastructure here, in green infrastructure and investments here in LA Metro. I want to continue that. And by participating in this California Green Bonds Committee, we are able to at least influence the conversation, not only on the standards on green bonds, but also understand how we can leverage what we already have done as an agency, what the state treasurer here in California is thinking about in terms of alternative forms of financing. That includes green bonds and similar issues, and how those two can get married, especially in this time wherein the fiscal resources have become very scarce. Other efforts that are out there right now that I've been involved with, I'm the committee chair for the Committee on Sustainability for the American Society of Civil Engineers. And just very briefly on our efforts in the past 2.5 years that I've been chair, we are almost done with the Sustainable Infrastructure Standard that will be balloted globally. And what the standard is going to do is, in essence, define how infrastructure and sustainability intersect, what sustainability means in terms of infrastructure's performance, and for that performance to be reflected in the design as well as construction of projects across the United States and across the different jurisdictions around the world. We also have activities in incorporating climate data into practice, activities in developing procurement language and that language into procurement documents, as well as activities on certification for practitioners who would like to be certified in sustainable infrastructure practice. There's also been an effort recently which is an offshoot of an initiative that we have started here in Los Angeles back in November of 2019, November of last year, the International Coalition of Sustainable Infrastructure. And working together with the Global Covenant of Mayors, the American Society of Civil Engineers Foundation, WSP, Resilient Shift, and other organizations like LA Metro. We have been convening a number of stakeholders under this coalition and have actually started the conversations on 4 action tracks, as we call them. And that is guidance and tools and standards, and the gaps on those topics and what still is needed in terms of guidance, tools, and standards for sustainable infrastructure. And again, one of the most important things, funding and financing. How do we actually make those particular projects push through, given scarce financial resources? And then innovation. What are the innovative projects that are out there? who are the innovative leaders, and how can we actually collect those best practices and allow those best practices to become global solutions for sustainability and resiliency. And then last but not least, leadership in life cycle. And where do we actually fit all of these leaders and ambassadors of sustainable infrastructure into this process. Post-lockdown, what's next? Everything has changed. The assumptions and baseline conditions have changed. And here in our agency, we are actually looking at developing through various means and various efforts through the LA Metro Recovery Task Force, things that we can do as an organization. What happens to the things that we are already doing? And are we using adequate and correct tools to come out of this particular issue? Post-lockdown, we're looking at and helping us rethink the new LA Metro. As far as the operational challenges are concerned, we're thinking about the logistics, the workforce, the cost challenges that we are actually working on and facing with. What does the transition look like? We are asked to work through the electrification of our fleet. What does the transition look like from natural gas buses to electrified bus fleets? And where does the tipping point lie, and what does it look like? We need to make adjustments to climate change and sustainability goals because of the constraints that we are working through. And we need to work through the operations adjustments due to the structural deficit that we're faced with as an agency. What are we trying to do? We're leveraging activities to reduce high unemployment. We reduce the impacts of lost ridership. We're rethinking the use of infrastructure due to decreased congestion. We're also protecting and creating better environment for our workers, given the fact that we have health concerns, not only in our buildings, but in our workspaces, in our construction projects, and the like. And then, most importantly, ensuring that we are actually moving progressively towards a more equitable society. The next few slides are just some pictures that I want to show you of how we have been adjusting our operations and one or two benefits that we have experienced coming out of this pandemic. So our operators, our bus operators right now are wearing masks. There are essentially shields, glass shields that's separating them from our patrons. We are allowing our patrons to actually ride on the back end of, on the backside of the bus, and we're requiring for our patrons to wear face masks. We are moving a significant number of people through our rail system, but how does that look like in terms of a social distancing space? In the planning of transportation systems, we plan for peak ridership, but now it's quite the opposite. We need to space our patrons apart so that we're able to actually protect them within our train systems. And then the new reality in terms of our stations. As you can see here on the bottom, Mariachi Plaza, which is on our Gold Line, has been converted. Part of that plaza station area has been converted as a COVID-19 test location. This is our cafeteria in our headquarters, practicing social distancing. And as with any other restaurants, it's essentially showing the same particular practice of not serving food within the space for now. And then the new reality in terms of our construction. We're able to close down a significant stretch of Wilshire Boulevard, one of the most congested streets in all of Los Angeles. And we're able to close it down because the volume of traffic has significantly gone down. And as you can see here, this is our Purple Line Extension project. As you can see here, we're able to work through Wilshire Boulevard without any issue. And then that's a long view of the same street and a progress picture of the particular location as well. I don't think we have a chance to look at this video, but when you have a chance, you can Google this Metro Still in Service for those who serve us. This is our tribute not only to our workers here in the agency, but for all of the essential workers who have dedicated their service during this pandemic. And then why are we really doing this? Going back to the topic, the question I asked earlier, how do we properly recover? Some are saying that we're doing this for the environment. Some are saying that we're doing this for our community. And some are saying that we do this for our children. What I'm really saying is that, and I propose that we look at the future with a blank slate. This is our opportunity to reinvent our future. It's our opportunity to do a self-reflection of what has happened to us and what's going to happen to us in the next few decades. It's an opportunity to look at our human beingness, of us as a people of this planet, of us trusting one another in the things that we do, in our work, in the front lines, and wherever we are. And they borrow a saying from an Australian Aboriginal proverb that says, we're all visitors to this time in this place. We're just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, to learn, to grow, to love. And then we return home. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today. I apologize for the technical challenges at the beginning of this lecture, but I hope that you are able to gather nuggets of wisdom, pieces of information, as well as points of reflection, not only for your lives, but for the lives of those around you. Thank you.
Great job, Cris. Thank you. Extremely well done. And I want to take the opportunity to congratulate you again on the ENR Award of Excellence, since we didn't get an opportunity to meet with you in New York and celebrate that due to the pandemic. I know we'll do that at a later date. But I want to say that's a very well-deserved award, and thank you for your leadership on sustainability, your service to ASCE, and the profession, and sharing all these great comments with us here today. I will make just a couple of comments, just a few updates on things that are happening at ASCE. Of course, Cris gave you a good update because he's chairing our committee on sustainability. Sustainability is inherent in everything we do as civil engineers. It's part of our code of ethics. It was actually in Canon 1 of our code of ethics. And our code of ethics is being revised right now. We have a committee that's been working on that, and you can find information online. Our board in July will be voting on a very comprehensive review to that. And it looks at different stakeholders. Number 1 being society, number 2 being the environment, number 3 being the profession, number 4 being clients and employers, and number 5 being peers. So please do take a look at that because we think that that is so critical. As you can see the deep comments that Cris was making about the importance of sustainability at the social, environmental, economic level. It's inherent in what we do as civil engineers, an important part of our code of ethics. We're updating our report card on America's infrastructure, and that will be coming out in 2021. We issue that every 4 years. And when you look at the grades on that infrastructure, you realize we have a huge gap. And so our Industry Leaders Council, which Feniowski is one of the co-chairs for that, he's going to become chair very soon. They have something called a grand challenge where we have a huge funding gap. The amount of funding that we need for infrastructure continues to go up. We can't keep up with the maintenance. It's an enormous amount with the way we're doing business today. So we advocate for more investment, absolutely, but we also have to think differently. Innovation, sustainability, resilience, And that's called this Grand Challenge. And they have some different ideas on how we do that with performance-based standards. You heard Cris talk about a new standard that's under development now. Look for public balloting in the fall on that. Focus on life cycle cost analysis. That's a significant part of this new standard that will be introduced next year. Resilience, and then innovation. And everything we do is trying to move innovation forward. Quick plug also, if you look at the Future World Vision Project on ASC's website, you can learn about some things that we're doing looking 50 years out and trying to figure out what is the world going to look like. Alternative energy, autonomous vehicles, climate change, smart cities, high-tech construction, policy and funding. All those are things that we've considered as we look at the different trends and the scenarios evolving from those trends, and developing a virtual reality tool that you can look at. That we've already introduced a floating city at our convention in Miami last year, and this year in October, we'll be rolling out something called a mega city. Last thing I'll mention is when you look at the Sustainable Infrastructure Standard, it's very closely linked to the Envision rating tool from the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. And as we look at what's happening today with the pandemic, and then look at the social justice and equity issues that are causing concerns all over the country and all over the world, if you look at that rating tool, one of the criteria is advancing equity and social justice, because we recognize that civil engineers have an important role to play as we make sure that we're engaging the stakeholder community on all of these projects, making sure that we're doing the right project, not just doing the project right. So we have a lot of different resources there. A lot of important concepts there are also in the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, if I could ask you, Cris, what do you think we can do as a profession to move the needle forward on innovation for sustainability? And maybe also, how do we engage outside the profession? I think that's one of our big challenges.
Yeah, as an engineer, and this is my observation, we really love dwelling on a number of technical issues and really grinding and dealing with that. We are leaders at the same time, and we need to exert that leadership as a profession. We need to engage and become involved with public policy. We need to get involved with the things that really matter to our constituents. As another colleague of mine had said many years ago, when I was a starting engineer, there are many paths towards successful engineering, a successful engineering career. One is a technical path, one is a policy path, one is a money path, and combining all of that, essentially, especially the policy path, would be quite, in my particular experience, quite fulfilling. Not only have I been involved with conversations that I've never imagined, affecting millions and millions of people as an engineer. That is quite an experience to be in. And I challenge anyone who has the kind of passion to start looking for those kinds of opportunities. Opportunities like that won't necessarily come to you. You need to look for those opportunities. And once you get in there, try to expand those and exert, the trust that the public has on this profession. I just want to say that one more time. The trust that the public has in this profession is very high. And because of that, we need to leverage that trust to affect changes, not only in our lives, but in the lives of everybody that we affect.
Thank
Great,
you.
Cris.
Thank you, Cris. And again, I want to thank Cris and Tom for both the information that was shared, as well as kind of the thought-provoking discussion, both of the role of engineers, a larger role in society. We have, Cris, based on your presentation, we have a question from Kylie King. She is actually from New York, and she's very interested in understanding kind of the play of the transit-oriented design that you presented, and what is going to happen with respect to the Olympics, the plans for the Olympics, and now taking consideration COVID-19, do you feel that ridership will continue to increase or will be impacted for concern of the social distances in the buses and the trains, and well as looking at the issue of social justice and equity? So it's almost everything combined that we're talking about. How do you see that particularly thinking it from a transit-oriented design.
Yeah.
And how do you see those coming together?
Yeah, that is a very loaded question, so I'll try to unpack it. So I think there are three parts to that question. The first one is the transit-oriented design, which we here in LA, we're now calling or rebranding that, I should say, as a transit-oriented community initiative. You know, it's not only the station itself that needs to be reimagined, to be re-envisioned, but you know the community that actually surrounds it needs to be reimagined, re-envisioned, and we've been doing that in the last few years. And the hope there was that, you know, because folks will essentially be living and playing and working, you know, near our stations, that we will be able to reduce the amount of congestion, you know, in the outlying areas or communities leading up to that station, and so on and so forth, right? And as you could imagine, in a sprawled out area like Los Angeles, you multiply that several times, and you have stations that are now becoming transit-oriented communities. Now people are only inclined to actually drive long distances if they physically need to, not if they want to, you know. So that's one part of that. The other part of this is that, you know, because of the pandemic, because of all the challenges that we have and presented in terms of ridership, you know, in terms of our buses now, we have the largest bus fleet in the whole country. You know, we're already anticipating that bus fleet to actually be 150% more because of the electrification initiative that we have committed to our population here in Los Angeles, and so that will grow from approximately 2,300 buses to almost 3,000 buses because of the range challenge that we're still foreseeing in the very near future. But with social distancing and all that kind of stuff, you know, we haven't done the math yet, but as you could do as a thought experiment, if you may, that 150% increase in buses can be more significant because now you can only pack, and again, like what I said earlier, the operative word there earlier was that we've designed for peak ridership, but in a post-lockdown world, social distancing, how does peak ridership look like, and what does it really mean? You know, we're trying to figure out what that means right now, not only for our buses but also for our trains. And then I think the last part there is in essence, you know, where does that lead us? You know, how does the planning of transportation systems actually going to change, and where do the rest of the infrastructure fit in? You know, in terms of the planning process, and how do those look like? The Olympics was designed, or we're planning for the Olympics with an acceleration of all these projects. And as our CEO mentioned to our board last time, we've accelerated so much the work, you know, this billions of dollars work, that the worst that can happen right now because of this pandemic is that we'll be on track and on schedule. So that's a good thing. The other good thing is that, you know, maybe a lessons learned for other folks in other parts of the world is that, you know, we were given an opportunity to actually fund these projects with a funding mechanism, Measure M, with no sunset. And because there's no sunset, even if worst case scenario, we are actually slowed down in terms of this pandemic, we'll be able to plan out over the long term without any constraint on the fiscal side of that equation. You know.
So Cris, maybe related to that, you know, when you're talking about the fiscal side, yeah. We had a question here from Yanis Silagakis, and you know, given the huge budget deficit and no help from the federal government, you know, what other sort of alternative sources of revenues are you all thinking about?
Yeah, so we are. Thanks, Tom, for the question, and to Yanis. I did mention earlier about the optimism that we have in terms of sales tax revenues, right? But going back to the question, we're also looking at bonding as a potential source of revenue. In my particular case, for my particular department, we're looking at creating, for example, environmental credit markets. May not necessarily be large initially, but can be a source of funding for some of the sustainable infrastructure projects that I'm responsible for here in the agency. We also have looked at carbon credits markets as a source of revenue for some of these initiatives that we have. We're also looking at public-private partnerships, but one can essentially sense for both good and bad that that's also an uncertain market right now. What's the appetite? Questions that are being asked: what's the appetite of the private sector in public infrastructure projects that we have? There's a lot of interest pre-lockdown. There continues to be a lot of interest as I speak to you today. How will that continue on? The stock market is doing well. Interest rates are low. The cost to borrow is inexpensive. Things seem to be aligning. But at the background of all of that is a public health crisis that might be ready to strike back, and how that might look like, for the rest of the next year or so. Not only here,
you
but
mentioned the private sector, and the first thing that comes to me thinking during the pandemic is SpaceX, and so NASA's trying it.
Yep, definitely.
Thank you again. Thank Cris. Thank Tom for your participation. Great presentation and discussion. I really thank both of you. I also want to thank again the collaborating organization, ACEC New York, AIA New York, ASCE, CMAA New York, New Jersey, ENR, and NAC. And also we'd like to welcome the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization as new collaborator in this series. Thanks also to my colleagues at Columbia who helped pull this together, including Michael Smith, Charles Chen, and Rick Bell. None of this would have been possible without them. I also would like to thank Eric McFarlane. He's one of our past speakers. Dick Anderson, one of our past co-moderators. Wayne Crew, one of our collaborators. Catherine Barbet, our next week's speaker, and Peter Murray, our speaker on June 30, for joining us today. They have been part of this conversation. And thanks especially to all of you out there in offices, agencies, at home, throughout New York City and around the world for taking some time to listen in to our lecture today. AIA and ASCE continuing education credits have been requested for this lecture. If you are an architect or an engineer seeking credit, the Eventbrite registration allows for indicating your AIA or ASCE membership number for proper credit. If you did not submit that information at registration, please send your name and membership number to us at cbips@columbia.edu. Next Tuesday, June 16, also from noon until 1, we will have the 6th lecture in the series. Our guest speaker will be Catherine Barbet, Director of Strategic Partnership of the Société du Grand Paris. Thanks, Catherine, for being here with us today. My co-moderator and respondent will be Marilisa Spigliano from AECOM and a member of the CBIPS Advisory Board. Following Paris, we will return to Los Angeles for a Zoom talk on June 23rd by Deborah Winthrop, Chief Deputy City Engineer and Chief Architect in the LA Bureau of Engineering. My co-moderator will be Lucio Soberman from USC Viverti College of Engineering. And on June 30, our speaker will be Peter Murray, Chairman of the New London Architecture and Architectural Advisor to London Mayor Sadiq Khan. Thanks again, all of you, for joining us, and stay well. Thanks, Cris. Thanks, Tom. Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your experiences with COVID-19 in our industry.
Thank you.
Thank you.